Hello, everyone. My name is Danielle Augustin. I'm the Product Marketing Manager for Conditional Access at Microsoft. In today's session, we'll focus on how you can strengthen your security posture with Microsoft Entra Conditional Access. I'll kick us off by framing why organizations need a new approach to securing access. I'll walk through what's changed in today's threat landscape and why conditional access serves as a zero-trust control plane for this new era of AI.
And hi, everyone. I'm Swaroop Krishnamurthy from the product management team for Microsoft Entra. I'll walk you through the practical side, how you can start strengthening your security posture using conditional access today. We'll cover three things on how Microsoft Entra enables adaptive access policies for your workforce, how we're extending these capabilities to AI agents, and how you can actually elevate identity security using AI. With that, back to you, Danielle.
Thanks so much, Sarup. So the reality is today, the threat landscape is intensifying. First, identity attacks aren't slowing down. 97% of identity attacks today are still password spray or brute force. Second, new threats are arriving fast. 70% of organizations report that they've experienced AI-related security incidents, whether it's attackers using AI to scale phishing or AI apps, or even agents. It introduced a new category of exposure, and the threat surface has expanded exponentially. Third, application sprawl is the new norm. The average organization now, according to Microsoft data, uses 2,500 applications, and every one of them has to be governed with adaptive access policies. In environments today that are complex, even mature defenses drift. And Microsoft data also shows an average of 26 policy gaps per customer per month. Coverage that's missing, misconfigured, out of date, because environments change faster than humans can keep up with. So the picture is clear. Strengthening security posture isn't optional, but it's a must. So when we think about it, identity is the first line of defense and the most targeted surface area. So if we're going to strengthen security posture, we have to start with zero trust. Zero trust is built on three guiding principles. First, assume breach. Operate as if attackers are already inside. Don't trust by default, but verify by design. Secondly, verify explicitly. Evaluate every access request against real signals. Who the user is, what device they're on, where they're connecting from, and what resource they're accessing, and the risk in that moment. And lastly, use least privilege access. Grant only the access that's needed, only for as long as it's needed. So identity is the backbone. Every attacker tries to pass through it, and every productivity workflow depends on it. A zero-trust control plane is how you defend it. Real-time adaptive access policies and continuous risk assessment made at every access request. At scale, billions of decisions a day with conditional access policies adapting in real time for every identity, your workforce, your workload identity, and AI agents acting on your behalf. And with AI, because identity security now scales faster than humans can. Microsoft Entra Conditional Access is the zero trust control plane that continuously protects access for every identity, whether it's your user, workload, and AI agent across every resource without compromising productivity. First, we enforce access controls with adaptive policies. Conditional access evaluates real-time signals. Your user, workload, agent context, device, location, and session risk to determine when to allow, limit, or block access, or even require strong authentication. That's how we protect your applications, your data, your network, and your infrastructure from identity-driven attacks across your organization. Second, secure every session for every identity, because security can't stop at sign-in. Conditional access keeps every session secure by monitoring changes in user risk, device compliance, and access behavior in real time, maintaining continuous visibility and enforcing controls throughout the session, across applications both on-prem and in the cloud. And lastly, elevate identity security with AI. This is where we move beyond what any human team can do manually, with AI-enhanced tools that reinforce zero-trust access controls. By operationalizing identity security with AI to help detect gaps across your environment, reduce policy sprawl, and ensure consistent, scalable enforcement. Microsoft Entra Conditional Access is Microsoft's zero trust control plane that continuously protects access for every identity across every resource without compromising productivity. And here's how it works at a glance. On the input side, it coordinates signals from across your environments: identity, device, app, location, and network signals. Analyzing whether the requester is a user, workload, or an AI agent, it evaluates those signals in real time and enforces fine-grained access controls to allow, require, or block access across every resource. All of it is reinforced by the outer layer you see here. continuous risk assessment, threat intelligence, and Microsoft Entra network controls, unifying in a single zero-trust control plane. The result is one consistent policy engine making billions of access decisions a day, adapting as the user, the device, the resource, and the risk change. With that, over to you, Svaroop, to walk us through how this comes together in practice.
Before we go further, a question we hear from almost every organization is, where do we actually start? Modern environments are complex. Signals, tools, identities, and access points are all moving in parallel. And the question isn't whether to act, but where to start first. There are steps that you can take to actually strengthen your access posture quickly and establish a strong baseline that you can build upon. Here's where we recommend you start. We'll begin with sync passkeys, where you see how to raise the bar on authentication and establish high assurance access as your baseline. From there, we'll extend adaptive access policies to AI agents, applying the same zero trust principles you use for your workforce to agents. So every identity in your environment is governed by the same control plane. Next, we'll bring together identity and network access controls together, extending conditional access beyond Entra integrated apps to any internet destination with global secure access. The trust is verified continuously throughout the session, not just at the moment of sign-in. And we'll close out with phased rollout, where the conditional access optimization agent will help you roll out new policies in stages, watching user impact at every step so you can tighten protection at scale with AI, doing the heavy lifting and making sure that nobody gets locked down. So let's get started. Let's start with the first pillar, enforce access controls with adaptive policies. This is the heart of conditional access. Real-time access decisions at every access request, powered by the signals you choose to evaluate, including user, device, location, application, agent context, and session risk. That gives your organization the enforcement controls you need, whether to allow, block, limit, or require strong authentication, matched to the risk of each request. Strengthening your posture starts with the credential itself. If it isn't phishing resistant, every control downstream inherits that weakness. The stats on screen are why this matters. Every organization is at a different point on this journey, and we want to meet you where you are. If you've got MFA, multi-factor auth, in place already, that's a great foundation. But there's still ground to cover. The North Star is the same for you as it's for us. Phishing resistant, high assurance account credentials at every stage of the user's lifecycle: sign-in, onboarding, and recovery. At Microsoft, we already require them for all access. So what does this look like in practice? Our recommendation is use case driven, not one size fits all. For admins, privileged users, and regulated industries, use device-bound passkeys. These are security keys, authenticator-based passkeys, Windows Hello for Business. For these kind of passkeys, the private key never leaves the device, so you can get the highest assurance and full attestation control. For everyone else, likely most of your workforce, use sync passkey. The same phishing resistance capability with far better usability and recoverability capabilities. Now, some of you may have already started rolling out passkeys, but let's be honest, even deployment isn't enough. A credential that is sitting unused doesn't actually raise your security bar. The protection only starts kicking in when phishing-resistant auth is enforced. That's what this demo is about, using conditional access as the ground control that requires passkeys for access to your resources, closing the gap between having the credential and depending on it. So let's take a look at that. Let's build the policy. And let's start with admins. That's because admins are the highest value identities that you have. You phish one of them and an attacker gets the keys to the kingdom. It's a small group, maximum risk reduction, minimal friction, the right place to start. So under users, I'm scoping this policy to my privileged roles in the tenant. Make sure to adhere to our break class account guidance for any exclusions on this policy. Next is the what. For admins, I'm targeting all resources, not a single app, but everything. These are privileged identities, so there's no special carve-out. Whenever an admin signs in, this policy applies. And now the control that makes it all real. Under grant, I'm requiring an authentication strength, specifically phishing-resistant MFA. This is the important nuance. I'm not asking for any MFA, which still leaves the door open to phishable methods. I'm requiring a phishing-resistant credential, exactly what passkeys deliver. I'll save the policy, and just like that, every admin reaching every resource on this tenant now has to clear this bar. That's how you have turned deploying passkeys into enforced protection, and admins are the perfect cohort to start with before you expand out to the rest of your organization. You've just seen how conditional access protects access for your workforce, but your workforce is no longer the only identity in your environment. AI agents are now accessing resources, and they need to be governed by the same zero trust principles. Let's look at how conditional access extends to protect those agents. Every agent you deploy is a new identity with its own access, and in most environments, there's no policy governing them yet. That's a big gap. An agent acts as both an actor and a resource, so you have to govern both sides. Extend zero trust principles to agents the same way you did for users. Verify explicitly, enforce least privilege, whether an agent is reaching a resource or another agent. From there, you can decide which agents access which resources, under what conditions, and which users, workloads, and agents can interact with each other. Secure collaboration across your whole estate without writing a rule for every single object in your tenant. The goal here is balance, productivity, and security, where only approved HR agents get access to HR resources, nothing more. So I'm creating a conditional access policy to access these HR apps that are tagged using custom security attributes, which lets me scale as agents come and go into the environment without touching the policy every single time. First, who this applies to. And this time it's not users, it's agents. I'm setting the assignment to all agent identities in my environment. Think of this as the population we're going to govern. Every agent by default falls under this policy. Now the important move. I've assigned all agents, but I don't want to block the good ones. So under exclusions, I carve out the agents carrying our approved HR security attribute. That's the pattern, default deny, and this attribute is how an approved HR agent earns its way in. Tag a new agent, it's automatically excluded. I never have to touch this policy again. Next, what are we protecting? I'm scoping this to our HR resources, the HR apps and APIs that hold the sensitive people-related data. So the policy now reads every agent reaching HR resources is in scope, except the approved ones I just excluded. And I'll do the same thing on the resource side. Instead of handpicking individual HR apps, I'm filtering target resources by the HR custom security attribute. Now, both sides of this policy are attribute driven. Approved agents, HR agents on one side, HR resources on the other side. As your estate grows, the policy scales. Last step, I turn on the policy and save. Now only approved HR agents reach HR resources. Every other agent is blocked by default, and it scales as agents come and go. Now, notice that I excluded these approved HR agents, but the obvious question is what protects them if one of them gets compromised? That's the next policy I'm going to show you. This one controls and watches how these agents behave. A risk-based policy that applies to all agents, no exclusions, so even these approved HR agents are covered. So let's look at that. Identity protection is the layer that makes it possible. It watches every agent's behavior for signals that matter. Sign-in spikes, failures, abnormal access to sensitive resources, sign-ins tied to risky users across both user to agent and agent to resource flows. And when something is detected, you get a full range of response. You can then quarantine or disable the agent. You can block it dynamically with conditional access. You can deny further token issuance and even extend the containment to the network layer, all with detailed logging that your SOC can use for investigations. So let me build that risk policy now. It's the same conditional access engine But this time, the condition isn't who the agent, it's the risk level. And unlike the last policy, this one has no exclusion. It applies to all agents. We target all resources, so a risky agent shouldn't be able to reach anything. So there's no scoping here. Every resource needs to be protected by this risk-based policy. Now, the condition that drives it all is this new condition called agent risk. I'm selecting high risk. So essentially, this policy triggers when identity protection flags an agent as high risk based on all the behavioral signals we talked about earlier, the spikes, the failure, and the abnormal access. And the control is simple, block access. So high risk agent, hard stop, no access to any resource. Now I've turned on this policy. Now I've got these two policies working in concert. The first decides who gets in, which is only approved HR agents reaching HR resources. Second watches how every agent behaves and blocks any risky agents. Both are governed by the same conditional access policy plane that we just discussed. That's how you extend zero trust to every agent in your environment and without having to write a rule for every single agent. You've now secured access for every identity, human and agent. But access at sign-in shouldn't mean access for the entire lifetime of the token. That's the second pillar, securing access across the entire session. For this, access needs to be reevaluated as conditions change. User risk, device compliance, access behavior, and revoked when adverse changes happen, instead of waiting for the token to expire on the next instance. So how do we extend that protection beyond the apps that conditional access already secures? By bringing identity and network controls together. A lot of access happens outside the cloud and on-prem app boundary, the open internet, legacy on-prem apps, traffics that never see an identity check. Now with global secure access, we can extend the same conditional access policy engine to that traffic as well. So trust is verified throughout the session, not just at the front door. Let's dive into conditional access for network access. Global secure access is pre-integrated into the conditional access fabric, so you can apply policy to any network destination. Microsoft apps, your own on-prem apps, the open internet, and users can only reach them after acquiring a valid token. That gives you zero trust coverage even for resources that don't support Entra authentication natively. And because it's the same engine, continuous access evaluation applies here too. When conditions change mid-session, access is revoked in near real time, not just at token expiry. And you can control how that enforcement works per traffic profile. You actually build up secure web gateway policies by allowing or blocking specific websites or categories. You can group them into a security profile and link that profile into conditional access. That link is where you can close the gap between identity and network, and your filtering now responds to the same risk and session signals as the rest of CA. And because profiles are prioritized, highest risk always wins. Lastly, let's talk about elevating identity security using AI. This is where we move beyond what any human team can do by hand manually. It's the shift to a continuous operating model where AI-enhanced tools constantly reinforce your zero trust controls, detecting gaps, cutting policy sprawl, and driving consistent enforcement at scale across your environment. This is where it starts to break. As organizations grow, policies just don't grow, but they explode into the hundreds. And the work of keeping them right falls on your identity admins. They're expected to spot when a new user or app isn't protected, investigate and mitigate stale or conflicting policies, capture undocumented exclusions, manually edit who has access to what. All of this is very time-consuming work, reactive and risky. And even strong admins often hand it off to consultants and outside experts because they don't have the time to keep up. So drift sets in, duplicate policies pile up, critical identities get missed, gaps open up. Not because the teams aren't doing their job, but because this simply doesn't scale by hand. And attackers thrive in exactly those blind spots. So this is where the conditional access optimization agent comes in. This agent continuously evaluates and improves your policies. It detects gaps, reduces sprawl, and strengthens your posture without the constant manual effort. And with this latest set of enhancements, it moves from a static guidance to continuous context-aware optimization. It understands your business context, surfaces the gaps that manual reviews miss, helps you act safely, and prove out the impact of any changes, truly giving you a new operating model for identity security. Let's look at an example of this. This is phased rollout, which allows you to deploy any conditional access policy gradually, with the agent managing each stage so you can tighten protection without locking anyone out. Here in my conditional access policies, I'll pick a policy that I want to roll out. It's currently in report-only mode, and I want to flip it on to on for everyone. But instead of doing that manually, I'll hand it off to the agent for a phased rollout. That's the difference. We're not doing a hard cutover from report-only to on, but a staged deployment that the agent manages for me. I ask the agent to generate a rollout plan. It looks at who the policy affects and proposes a stage path, starting small with a pilot and then widening in steps, so that I'm not exposing my entire user base at once. The agent does the planning, I just review it. Here's the plan the agent puts together, the stages and the population in each stage. I review it, and when I feel comfortable, I approve and kick off the rollout. I stay in control, nothing gets deployed until I sign off, and then agent can take over the execution after. Once the execution kicks off, I can watch the rollout in flight. I can watch the agent working through the stages, and I can see exactly where it is, which groups are live, what are still pending, and there's full visibility as it advances, and it also automatically rolls back if it runs into any issues. Drilling in, I get the deployment detail for each stage, who's landing, how are we doing on each policies before we wide into the next group. And here's the full picture, the phased rollout dashboard. You can see every policy that I've staged, which one is in rollout, all in one place. So instead of a risky big bang cutover, now I've got a controlled, visible deployment that the agent has been driving end to end, tightening protection at scale, but not locking out any users. We ran a real-world independent study with around 200 admins, half using the conditional access optimization agent, half working manually, across 4 real tasks: merging overlapping policies, catching baseline controls, planning phased rollouts, and aligning new users to existing policies. The agent group was 43% faster overall, 48% more accurate, over 200% better at catching missing baseline policies, and saved 60% of the admin's time on policy merging alone. Fewer gaps, stronger posture, and more time back for these admins. And remember, the goal isn't just to react faster, it's to get proactive. Does the agent help you move faster, validate smarter, and focus on what matters most for you as the admin? With that, back to you, Danielle, to close us out.
Thanks, Swaroop. So we just showed you how Microsoft Entra Conditional Access helps you strengthen your security posture for your organization. First, we spoke about enforcing access controls or adaptive access policies. Conditional Access helps you evaluate real-time signals across your user, workload, and AI agents. That's what moves you towards the North Star we opened with, phishing-resistant access to resources. Secondly, we discussed securing every session for every identity, because trust can't stop at sign-in. With continuous access evaluation reaching any app, web traffic, and legacy on-prem resources, a change in risk revokes access in real time, not hours later. And thirdly, elevate identity security with AI. The conditional access optimization agent moves you from reactive, manual cleanup to a continuous operating model, detecting gaps, cutting policy sprawl, and proving impact at scale. Enforce, secure, elevate. Microsoft Entra Conditional Access is the zero trust control plane that continuously protects access for every identity across every resource without compromising productivity. And here are some resources to help you learn more and get started with Microsoft Entra Conditional Access. On behalf of Saurabh and myself, thank you so much for your time and for joining us today.